I'm Willie Ruff. I was born about a mile from here. And all of the other buildings that were important to my early life, 91 years ago, are gone. Torn down. They outlived their usefulness. The church that my family attended, the school, elementary and high school. Keep in mind that this was in the 1930s during segregation. So we couldn't go to school with white people. Certainly not church. But you could go to the picture show in this building. Had to sit upstairs in the balcony, but that was no big deal. Everything else was separated. And I remember coming here when I was 3 years old, brought by my uncle. My uncle's name was Grover Ruff, and he was crazy about the picture shows. And when he came here to be with his brother and my mother and me, he would often come and we would sit up there in that balcony. And I just happened to pass driving down here from over 14th Avenue where I was born. And I passed this big house that had been built by a railroad engineer for his family, and my mother worked there. The picture started, I'm sitting next to my uncle, and off in the distance is this small figure come in like a bat out of hell, and you could, after a while, you could see that it was a locomotive, a train. I started running down the steps, and I decided that all grown folks, white and black, were crazy, because I was the only one trying to get out of here. I got down to the bottom of the stairs, and I was calling my Uncle Grover. Uncle Grover, the train's gonna kill you. Come on down here. And the train didn't kill us. I had a neighbor directly across the street from me on 14th Avenue, right up the hill there. It's not even a mile from here. And a white boy. And he was quite a drummer. And he would set up his drums. He was still in high school. He would set up his drums. I was maybe 5 or 6 or something like this. And he was a junior or senior in high school and played the bass drum and the snare drum in the Sheffield White High School band. And he used to bring the radio from inside and set it out on the lawn of his house and put on Benny Goodman and Count Basie records and play his drums along with it, you know, with what was coming out of the record player. And I got interested enough to start going across the street. And the street was not even paved. It was a gravel road, 14th Avenue. And a car might come by every second or third day. So it was no danger in my running across the street. And Mutt taught me how to read drum music. You know? And later on, he started bringing school drums home to practice on. And I would meet him halfway to his school, the white school. And we'd bring the drum home, and he'd play something, march music or rhythms. And then when we got home, he'd show me how that looked on paper. And he said, what you're seeing here is really the microcosm of an orchestra, because the way there's number concern in it, you couldn't have more or less of that. And that was the way I learned how to read music, and it helped me tremendously from then on. I had seen the Tuskegee Airmen fly over this town, up and down Montgomery Avenue from the standpipe all the way to Mr. Paris Swope's office. Right on Montgomery, just around the corner. And so I knew about the Tuskegee Airmen. I knew about the band. They came with an 85-piece band and played that while a squadron of airplanes came over, and this was just for the black children, because they came to help us, to inspire us to sell war bonds in this theater. War stamps and war bonds. They'd come by and, give you. But this event that Mr. Swopes, who graduated from Tuskegee and who brought Dr. George Washington Carver to Baptist Bottom to talk agriculture to the black farmers around here. And he was on the board of directors at Tuskegee and was able to have them send up a whole squadron of pilots and in fighter planes. And each time they would fly up to the standpipe, they'd come back down Montgomery Avenue, flying lower and lower. After a while, they were knocking the leaves off to the top of the trees, And all the little ladies, on the last trip down, they threw back their canopies and took off their helmets so we could see their handsome brown faces. And all of the girls started hollering, "Fly, fly, fly, you pretty bleep-de-bleeps." I ain't going to say what they called them, but it was an act of love. And I just couldn't make up my mind. If I wanted to be in that band playing W.C. Handy's St. Louis Blues, Glenn Miller's arrangement of it, or if I wanted to be up there. I got up there, but I didn't fly, because later on, after I'd enlisted in that band out in Columbus, Ohio, we flew in a show to every air base in the United States to put on a big, huge variety show. It was actually presented by a master of ceremonies named Chappie James, another Tuskegee graduate. And the thing that I always appreciated about Colin Powell was he always referred to the Tuskegee Airmen as my beloved Tuskegee Airmen. My mother died when I was 13. And my father and she were not together. He lived in Evansville, Indiana. And after she died, he came, picked me up, and took me to Evansville. And Evansville was not right. Evansville was really a piece of work. And I knew that I couldn't stay there. So I had this cousin who had gotten his father's permission to enlist in the Army at 17. And that the American Armed Forces was hard up back then, because the World War II had just ended. Everybody was getting out, getting civilian jobs and all. And they were just short of people. So my cousin, who had enlisted at 17, decided he didn't like it, and they said in recruiting, if you don't like it, you can get out. And just let us know, and we'll send you home. And that's what he did. But in spite of the fact that he had gotten out, he started to try to talk me into enlisting. He says, anything you can do out here, you can do better in uniform, and especially music. He said, that is professional level out there. And I was playing in, piano and the drums a little in Evansville. And so he talked me into it, and I woke my father up this one morning. I'd gone down and got papers and forged them. I forged my father's name and said that I was 17 with his permission, but I was only 14. And enlisted and got sent to Fort McClellan down in Anniston, Alabama for basic training. Best thing that ever happened. About 4 years, and the way I left them was I read in a newspaper, a jazz magazine called Downbeat, an interview with Charlie Parker. And the interviewer said, "Charlie, you are clearly at the top of your game. You're the best known, the highest earning player of modern jazz." He said, "If you could do whatever you wanted with the next few years, what would that be?" And Charlie Parker said, "I am self-taught. I never had formal training." And he says, "And I need it." And he said, "There has come to my attention recently here in New York, I keep hearing music by this German composer called Paul Hindemith. It happened that Hitler had run Hindemith out of Germany just before the war started because Hindemith had married a Jew. He was 19 years old, or let me say, at 19 years old, he was the concertmaster in the Frankfurt Opera Orchestra. And that's a big deal. 19 years old and you're second in command of the whole opera orchestra. One of his students in one of Germany's most elite prep school was a young man named Werner von Braun. And Hindemith taught him both piano and cello and composition. Charlie Parker said, "If I could manage it, I hear that Hindemith is at Yale," and he says he keeps having premieres in Carnegie Hall, Town Hall in Philadelphia, Boston, all these places, just about every week. Charlie Parker said, "I would go and sit at his feet and learn me some music." I said, "Well, I'm 15 now." By then, I was 16. I said, "Uncle Sam promised me an education, anywhere I could get in. And I don't know anything about Yale's music, or I don't know anything about this cat, Paul Hindemith, but I'm going to find out." And I wrote to Yale School of Music, and they sent me a catalog. And a little while later, they sent me an invitation to come and play an audition. And by some miracle, they let me in. I think perhaps my most important films were done with taking Dizzy Gillespie to St. Simon's Island in Georgia, because we learned something from this old lady who was in her 80s, Bessie Jones, who had learned children's dances that her grandparents had brought from Africa, and they taught it to their children down there. And then I had talked to all of the great black drummers that I knew, and we were talking about how interesting it would be to take a black American drummer to West Africa and try to trace the lineage of some of the dancing and drumming practices that we have. And I was able finally, after getting a modest grant from the National Endowment of the Arts, DC, government money, but they didn't have much of the government money. So I was able to get a grant large enough to buy 3 Super 8 cameras, plenty of batteries, and have the most vibrant young drummer named Tony Williams, who was playing with Miles Davis when he was 15, traveling the world with Miles. And I told him what the project was and what I had in mind, and that the music, of course, was central. And we got over there and we found that we learned a lot about the talking drum. There's drum language. Everybody who lives in this world that they inhabit know the language that they can use on drums. In other words, they can say to you with drums what they can say to you verbally. Yeah. And that was the way they sent messages that couldn't be deciphered. And there were insurrections organized in America just on the power of the talking drum. One in Stono, South Carolina, just south of Charleston. And there was a huge insurrection in which a lot of slaves killed their slave masters. Nothing but drums, talking. And the talking drums were outlawed from that point on. So that was an important, I took, as I said, Tony Williams to Senegal, and we saw every kind of dancing, which to me was an interruption. I expected to be able to capture drumming without people dancing. You can't go to Senegal and have special drumming and keep those people from dancing. They're gonna dance. It'd make you like it, and I did, And the dancing was a major part of the whole enterprise with that. And Tony Williams died not too long after that. Handy came to Sheffield because by this time he had joined ASCAP. So he was here writing arrangements and orchestrations of spirituals that he thought should be preserved, that he'd heard right in this part of the world, mainly in Florence. And he went to visit his former pupil again, less than a mile from where we are now. And they gave him room and board, and they asked him if he would pay his room and board with a visit to the children at the school. And he came with his trumpet. And he pulled reverse psychology on the children. And he had a very peculiar way of speaking. He said, "Rumor has it that the children of Sheffield don't know how to sing." And we went, shit. What do you got? He had his trumpet with him, And he did the Moses song, "Go Down Moses," and after it was all. And he says, "Before we leave, I want to tell you, children, that about the day that I was in our school in Florence, one-room schoolhouse, all 12 grades, were being taught there by one of the first members to graduate from Fisk University in the graduating class. He taught the whole class. And he said he asked the children to stand up one by one and say what they wanted to be and do in life. And some said doctors and others said lawyers and merchants and all these things. And, they wanted to be. And when he came to me, he asked me to say what I wanted. He says, "I want to be a musician." And said the teacher read him a lecture. He says, "You shouldn't be a musician. It will take you to the gutter. You will go to the gutter and you will suffer from it because it is not a respectable profession that way." And said, and the teacher wrote a note to my father and said my father read the note and says, "Sonny, I'd rather follow you to your grave than see you be a musician." Now that's cold. That is cold. And then we sang a little more and we came to the end. And he said, "Now I want to see a show of hands of any of you children who want to be a musician." Mine went up. So we were a couple of other kids too. We went up on the stage And we all shook his hand. And I said, damn, that hand has done something today. It shook the hand that wrote the St. Louis Blues. I'm going home and tell my mama. I said, Mama, look at that hand. She said, it looks about the same to me, dirty. I said, but it shook the hand that wrote the St. Louis Blues, and I'll never wash it again. She said, you're going to wash it if you come to my dinner table. Said, it probably gave the poor old man some kind of disease. Look at that hand. It wasn't clean. So I said, well, I think I can sop as good with the left as I can with this one. So if I keep this one in Parker, can I come eat with this one? I lasted about a week. But Mr. Handy became my man just then. John Hammond was a Vanderbilt. You know about Vanderbilt, the family? The Commodore, they call the head guy, because he owned a lot of ships and made a lot of money. A lot of money. And one of his daughters was John Hammond's mother. And John worked, he came to me one time and said, somebody told me you went to Yale. And I said, yeah. And he said, so did I. But I left after about a year and a half because I recognized that there was no place for me in the world that I adored but music. A young lady, 18 years old, from Detroit. And her father had let John Hammond take her to New York to make a jazz record. 18 years old, sing and play the piano well. And he said, I've got this young lady down here and she's bored to death being in New York we've been working on this project for three years. Three weeks, rather. And he says she's just dying she wants to be a jazz player and singer. And he said, I own the club by this time. You know, he says, if you let her come up and she doesn't have a bass player, you play with her, and she plays the piano. And he said, if you'll let her do that, I'll make it up to you. And he said, I'll put her on the train, express train from New York to New Haven, 55 minutes. So you go to the station and I'll tell you, what train to meet. And I said, does she have a name? And he says, yeah, Aretha Franklin. She was so charming at 18 years old. She hadn't been out on the road like that before. And the audience just loved her, and she loved being loved, And it was really one of the most amazing, satisfying things to watch. And John Hammond was just beside himself with delight that she was so happy in there. And, didn't cost me anything. I didn't have to pay her. Columbia Records was paying her. Mm-hmm. And she get a little taste of wine, and and she was whatever she wanted to be. Oh, he had heard that I was from Alabama. He says, "Where in Alabama are you from?" I said, "I'm from a little community in northwest Alabama that you never heard of." He said, "You want to try me?" And I said, "Yeah, Sheffield." He said, I covered the Scottsboro trial. And he said, I hadn't been out of Yale that long, and I was writing for newspapers and stuff. And he said, and I bought a brand new little Packard coupe And I drove from New York to Scottsboro for the trials. And he said they were so tension-driven and unpleasant that by the end of the week, I asked some of the locals around the courthouse and all. He's sitting in the courtroom, you know, taking notes. And he said, I asked people, do I have to go all the way to Birmingham to hear some good black music? He said, no, you can get plenty of that in Sheffield. And he said, and that's when I learned Sheffield. He said, Sheffield was also well placed because they had the only first-class hotel in North Alabama. 5 stories with an elevator, first class, Sheffield Hotel. Now, I had an adopted godfather, like, you know, man who moved into my neighborhood, you know. And he was, when he retired, and he had been head waiter at Sheffield Hotel. And we became like me and my shadow. Wherever he was, I was down there following him around, you know, and he'd take me to the Sheffield Hotel and showed me, you know, how it worked and how you, and he said, now I had the pleasure of serving food to 3 of America's celebrities: Firestone, Henry Ford, and Thomas Edison, all at the same table. And he said, I never had to write it down. They tell me what they wanted, I come back and it's right there the way it was. You know? So he says, people ask you where you from, you say it loud and say it proud. Sheffield, Alabama.